Right now, as we speak, there's an invisible war happening in fields all across the globe. It's this incredibly high-stakes battle between the crops that feed all of us and the pests that want to eat them for lunch. And believe me, the outcome of this war is what determines what actually ends up on our dinner plates.
There's this quote from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass that just nails the essence of this conflict. It's this idea of an endless race where you have to run as fast as you possibly can, not to get ahead, but just to stay alive.
And in science, this idea actually has a name, the Red Queen hypothesis. It perfectly describes this relentless back-and-forth evolutionary arms race where plants and pests are just locked in this constant struggle, purely for survival.
So what does this cycle actually look like? Well, imagine a plant evolves some new chemical defense that makes it taste awful to a beetle. For a little while, that plant species is going to thrive, right? It's winning. But that puts enormous pressure on the beetle population. The only beetles that survive are the ones that, by some random mutation, can tolerate that chemical. They reproduce, and pretty soon, the plant's advantage is totally gone. It's back to square one. Both of them are running as fast as they can just to stay in the same place.
Okay, so that's the big picture, this constant evolutionary arms race. But how does this battle actually play out on a molecular level? I mean, how do these organisms even know they're supposed to be fighting? Well, it all comes down to a kind of genetic code of engagement.
And that is the fundamental question, isn't it? A plant can't see an insect coming, it can't hear it munching on its leaves, so it needs a totally different kind of alarm system. And that system, it turns out, is written in its DNA.
Scientists call this the gene-for-gene hypothesis. And honestly, the best way to think about it is like a lock and a key. The plant has a very specific lock. That's its resistance gene, or R gene. The pest, when it attacks, introduces a specific key, which is a protein from its avirulence, or AVR gene. Now, if that key fits that specific lock, ding, 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 the plant's alarm system goes off and it launches a massive counterattack.
So really, this genetic handshape can only have two outcomes. First, you've got resistance. The plant has the right R gene lock, the pest shows up with the matching AVR gene key, and the threat is immediately recognized. Boom, defenses are up. The other outcome is susceptibility, and this happens if, say, the plant doesn't have the right lock or, and this is the clever part, the pest has mutated and changed its key. If that happens, the pest is basically wearing an invisibility cloak. It can attack freely without ever setting off the alarm.
And listen, this isn't just some abstract theory. This whole lock and key system has been proven again and again in some of the most critical food crops on Earth. In wheat, for example, scientists have found at least 35 different resistance genes specifically for fighting the Hessian fly. And in rice, they've actually cloned the specific genes from both the plant and the pest so they can watch this interaction happen firsthand. It's amazing stuff.
So this whole drama plays out in about 4 phases. First, the plant has a kind of general alarm system called PTI that recognizes really common stuff on pests, like chitin from an insect's exoskeleton. Step 2, the pests fight back. They inject their own little proteins, called effectors, to try and shut that general alarm down. But, and this is key, we have step 3. If the plant has a specific R gene that recognizes that exact effector protein, that's when it triggers a huge targeted defense, the ETI. And of course, that just leads us right back to step 4, evolution. The pest adapts, the plant adapts, and the arms race just keeps on going.
Okay, so that's the molecular theory behind the fight. Now let's get our boots on the ground and see how this genetic war is actually playing out on 2 of the world's most important battlefields, the wheat fields and the cotton fields.
When it comes to fighting a nasty fungus called leaf rust, wheat has 2 main strategies in its playbook. First is something called seedling resistance. Think of this like a brittle sword. It's incredibly sharp and effective against one specific type of enemy. But if that enemy changes just a tiny bit, that sword just shatters. The second strategy is adult plant resistance, or APR. This is much more like a durable shield. It gives broader protection that turns on later in the plant's life, and it is way, way harder for the fungus to figure out a way around it. And plant breeders have actually identified the specific genes that build this durable shield. LR34 is an absolute superstar. It gives wheat protection against 3 different rusts and powdery mildew. Then you have LR46, a multitasker that basically just slows the disease way down. And LR67 is what I like to call the gatekeeper. It actually starves the pathogen by cutting off its food supply. These are the powerful tools that breeders are using to build defenses that last.
Now, if the war in the wheat field is like fighting a single organized army, the battle over in the cotton fields, well, that's a whole lot messier. The main enemy there is the whitefly, but it's not just one pest, it's a whole complex of different genetic groups, and each one has its own special set of tactics.
This means breeders really have to know their enemy, and the enemy has multiple faces. You've got the MEM1 group, which is just a super aggressive, widespread attacker. Then you have the MEED group, which is famous for becoming resistant to pesticides almost overnight. The challenge here is just immense, because a cotton plant that's bred to fight off MEM1 could be completely helpless against MED. You're fighting a war on multiple fronts at the same time.
All this complexity brings up a really critical question. I mean, with all these different pests and all these different environments, how can scientists possibly figure out which plants are actually winning? How do you get reliable battlefield intelligence?
And here's the real kicker for plant breeders. A variety of cotton that looks like a total champion in a test field in one part of the world might be a complete dud when you try to grow it somewhere else with a different climate or in a different year. Its genetic defenses aren't absolute, they totally depend on the environment.
This is a phenomenon known as the genotype by environment interaction, or G by E. And what it means is you can't just find one single champion plant. A champion's performance is always relative to the arena it's fighting in. What works perfectly in a hot, dry field might completely fail in a cool, wet one.
So how do scientists get around this? Well, they have to get smart. They test their most promising plants in tons of different locations, over several years. Then they use these really powerful statistical tools to cut through all that environmental noise. And what this does is it shows them which plants are the real stable champions, the ones that are consistently good everywhere. It also reveals these fascinating which one where patterns, which lets them make much smarter decisions about what to plant where.
So all this intelligence, all this data, it all leads to the final question: how do we breed for the future? Well, scientists now pretty much accept that this war can't be won in the traditional sense, so the goal has shifted. It's moved from total victory to something more like sustainable, long-term management.
One of the coolest modern strategies is something called gene pyramiding. Instead of just relying on one resistance gene, that brittle sword we talked about, breeders are now stacking multiple different R genes into a single plant. You can think of it like building a fortress. Instead of one wall, you've built a fortress with 3 or 4 or 5 walls. For a pest to break through, it has to figure out how to get past every single one of those defenses at the same time. And that is exponentially harder.
And this really gets to the modern philosophy of this whole thing. The goal isn't to find one silver bullet gene that's going to wipe the enemy out forever. All that does is create this intense pressure on the pest to evolve some kind of magic key. Instead, the goal is durable resistance. It's about creating these resilient systems with multiple layers of defense that last longer and keep the enemy at bay without trying to completely annihilate it.
Which, of course, leaves us with one final big thought. Plants and pests have been locked in this arms race for millions and millions of years, but now there's a brand new player on the field: human ingenuity. Our ability to read the genetic code, to move genes between species, to analyze these battles across entire continents. In this endless war, could it be that our science is the ultimate evolutionary advantage, the one thing that can finally secure our food supply for the future?